Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Still a couple of minutes left. It is super exciting for me to be here. You all look like a very excited crowd, so let's jump into it. We're going to talk about delivering best-in-class, real-time, intelligent experiences. But before we talk about that word salad, let's talk about who am I and why am I here, right? This is part of who I am, not all of it. I asked my question, and the first picture that you see with the monkey on the keyboard, that's a live shot when I started my developer days. That's exactly how I started. Then I went to doing some good, fun engineering work. I don't know if I became Master Yoda, but eventually made my way to product and consulting and got bored of making slides, came back to doing developer, and that's me as Jack Sparrow. And now I serve as an architect at Capital One. I help lead the architecture practice for our credit card business. All the things that you see at the bottom, those are places that I have had the pleasure and the opportunity to work at, and it's been great. So let's jump into the content itself. Okay, so many words. Like I said, I have a lot of words, and that's why I didn't want to talk too much about these words. This is perhaps not what we're going to talk about. What we are actually going to talk about is how do we go from the Dweebus system to an actually well-architected system. And we'll talk more about how we achieved some of that in the work that we did, even at different large fintechs and also financial services. So let's jump into it. This is what our engineers face every day. Every day, we look at our engineers, and we get guidance and practice-related information and inputs, and engineers are like, oh, yeah, I should do this. And you go and talk to another engineer, it looks very different, and you're like, oh, I should do this. And that's where it's a spider web. And we all know we don't need another Spider-Man movie. I think we all understand the origin stories. So given that, let's talk about what does this fragmented guidance that we keep getting from different engineering organizations, architects, product leaders, what does it really do to us? And what does it do to us as technologists, as engineers, as even DevOps experts? What does it really do to us? And what it really gives us is, it gives us a lot of overreaction or a lot of reactive design. It gives us a lot of impact on the customer experience itself. And again, it makes us do different types of similar things again and again and again in a repetitive fashion, which we could have perhaps done with some reusable code. And the last but not the least, most importantly, it doesn't tell you whether you have architected or designed a platform well, or a system well, or an application well. And to that point, these are like some of the things that we saw that keeps happening again and again. So what we said, okay, let's jump in on the customer impact, because that's the part I'll talk about real quick, and then we'll jump into like how do we measure these as well. When we talk about customers, there are two big parts to it: what the customer sees directly, right, and then what the customer explicitly or rather implicitly is expecting, right? So you might have great visual design. You see Homer's web page out there. You see Kermit trying his best from the user navigation. And there might be certain usability that you might see. But what that really means is, they are implicitly, customers are expecting, how do we make sure that the pages load quickly, right? Are they able to press submit when they can? And there are many more other implicit expectations. Now, when these expectations are not met, what happens? There are major customer impacts, and that's where you see the cat in the middle. He doesn't look, they don't look very happy, and essentially the customers are not happy because we as developers, architects, tech leads, engineers are perhaps not able to support the latency that they're expecting. We are not able to support some of the failures that we should be having them recover. And then also in some cases, there is, from a scaling perspective, there is increased customer demand, right? So those are like some things that we see as far as the problem is concerned. So let's jump in on saying, how did we solve some of this, and how you should solve some of this at the different places that you work with. And if anything that you take from this presentation or this talk, I would definitely say, think about what does good look like? What does the North Star look like? And I think that's where we went and said, okay, let's define and start an initial framework. As an architect, you always want to create new frameworks. A lot of people don't like that, but that's just the way life rolls. And what we did was we created something called SPICE. And again, what we mean by SPICE is, as you can see, is we talked about security, we talked about performance efficiency, we talked about some intelligent contributions, think about multi-tenancy platforms, think about how do we make multi-tenant platforms in that case. We talked about how do you optimize the cost on the cloud, right? Because working on the cloud is very different. Getting on the cloud is one part of the journey, but once you get on the cloud, what to do from there? I think cost optimization is a very large part of it. And then how do you excel in the operations that you had? So that's basically what we did with some of the framework, and I'm not sure if I did a great job with the salt sprinkling, but that's essentially to tell you like how we got that together. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what does SPICE comprise of, right? What we really did was we said, hey, there are certain pillars, there are certain sub-pillars, there are certain requirements, there are certain guidance and metrics and automation. And I want every engineer in this room to focus on the last two, because usually you always get the first three. Usually people don't give you the last two. And I think that's where the delta is, where we see, hey, you can't just tell engineers to be, hey, you need to make a reliable system. That does not cut it. You need to tell them, if you're trying to make a reliable system, you need to think about reliability, elasticity. You need to think about what does auto-scaling look like, what does predictive scaling look like, what does dynamic scaling look like. So with that, let's dive deeper, and we'll quickly go through this. This is just one example of the pillars that I talked about earlier. To think through, and again, a lot of frameworks we reference. There's the AWS well-architected framework. There are frameworks on the GCP side. There are frameworks on the Azure side. And what we really looked at was saying, hey, what is the ability of a system to continuously deliver customer value the way it was intended to, right? And to do that, when you look at the reliability pillar, we kind of went down all the path of saying, hey, think about fault detection, think about data backups, think about fault prevention, think about how do you design for scale, elasticity, I talked about reliability testing, and so on and so forth. So that was one of the big things that we tried to do. And then we didn't stop there. We said, hey, when you talk about reliability, what on earth does that mean, right? And then we said, okay, this is how we are defining reliability. This is how we are talking about the requirements that are in the reliability piece. The big thing there to note here, you have to think about personas. You have to think about who are these requirements for. And we'll come to that in a second. Now, not only did we define requirements, and I would encourage you all to define just like, it's not just non-functional requirements, there are broader implications on that as well. And then you say, okay, you've defined the requirement. Then, in the words of the wise Morpheus, right? I can only show you the door. You are the one who has to walk through it. And that's where we said, okay, we're going to show you the tooling. What is the tooling that you need? What are the patterns that you need? And being able to have this prescriptive guidance and input so that engineers can actually do their work in a more, I would say, standardized manner, right? And then, this is the biggest learning that we had in this was, hey, what you can't measure, you can't improve. And you have to measure. And measuring is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And that's why we said, okay, how do we measure these? What do the metrics look like? In this case, we are talking about elasticity. So we kind of said, hey, okay, from an AWS perspective, there's CloudWatch, right? How do we go and look at the auto-scaling configuration? How do we actually get that in a way that can correctly surmise how it is impacting the end customer experience? And then, this is what I was talking about. Who is this SPICE for? And I want you all to add the SPICE to your lives in your communities as well, because it's not just for engineers, it's not just for tech leads, and it's not just for Ted Mosby, the architect, either. It is for product owners, it's for business leaders, it's also for executives, right? And if you all have seen any of these shows, I'm sure you can tell how important all of these people think they are. So that's one of the big pieces on who is it for. And then the last thing I'll say is also, how do you automate this, right? It's very nice to put these on slides and confluences and having like Jira tickets following all of these over time, but it's not going to get you anything if you can't automate. And the key thing to take from this is there are two types of, I would say, categories of how you implement this. One is a reactive and one is a proactive. And that's how you see these colors on the slide. And the reactive is, you have built the application and then you're measuring on them. Whereas the proactive piece is, it's in your IDE. You are sitting down, you're writing code, and you look and say, hey, I want to create an API. And for an API, I might need a Lambda, I might need a DynamoDB, whatever it might be. at that point in time, you are getting recommendations, right, saying, hey, if you're thinking about reliability, think about auto-scaling groups. Have you configured them or not? And that's where the real value comes in. And then, again, going to the next slide real quick, what can you do with this spice? You can take this, you can create your own flavor of this, you can talk about what is relevant for you, and then introduce it to your product people, because here's the thing. Engineers might end up doing all of this and creating amazing metrics and amazing outcomes, but the real impact only happens when business and product are on board and actually are investing in this. So with that, I would like to thank you all, and thank you for listening, and I appreciate you all. Thank you.